What's going on, everybody? Eric here for the Unlockables podcast. Before we begin this episode, I just want to give a special shout out to all the people who support the show on Patreon. These incredible people are Chris from 1 Hour, 1 Decision, Stephen Pay, Dave Jackson, Chris Copleen, Rick Firestone, Colby Moyer, Keith Gasper, and Nikolai at Night. Words cannot describe what your continued support of this little podcast means to me. Now, let's get on with today's episode. What is going on, everybody? My name is Eric. You're listening to another incredible episode of the Unlockables podcast, the story of video games, the people who played them, and the memories made along the way. I'd like to thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Wherever, whenever in time and space you might be located, means the absolute world to me that you're willing to click on that play button and check out the podcast and see what it's all about. We've got a good one for you guys today. Might be a little bit shorter, but I'm excited to get into it. Before we do that, though, I just want to give a big shout out to the guys over at Hyper Potions. I am continuing to use a portion of one of their songs for the intro to the Unlockables podcast. I have the link to the song as well as their YouTube channel in the description. You should go check it out. They have a lot of great, awesome music that they make. It's really upbeat. It's centered around video games. It's so cool. They have a whole big album playlist collection they just put out called the Collector's Box. Definitely go check that out. That'll have you jamming for a good part of your commute for probably the whole week, unless you commute really far. Then it'll probably only last you maybe one way or both ways back and forth. I don't know, but definitely go check out the guys over at Hyper Potions and give them some love there. Very supportive of the people in the community, creating their own things, streaming, making videos, making podcasts. Definitely a cool couple of dudes. So go check them out, as always. Now, you probably know by the title of the episode, you might be tired of me putting these out by now, but today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite games of all time. Actually, it is the prequel to one of my favorite games of all time, Advance Wars. Advance Wars 1, not Advance Wars 2 Black Hole Rising, which is one of my favorite games of all time, but Advance Wars 1, which is still a fantastic game. It was the precursor to what came before in Advance Wars 2, and I think Advance Wars 2 just took the formula and refined it and tweaked it a little bit, added some more maps, and made it to what its full potential truly was. And at the time of recording of this episode, where probably, depending on when I decide to release it, probably 2 days before the release of Advance Wars 1 and 2 Reboot Camp, finally getting a release date, and we are days away from having this game in our hands, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to play it. I'm going to consume it probably for the next couple of weeks until Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom comes out, which is right on the horizon. We are eating good video games this year so far. So what's the big deal about Advance Wars? Well, if you've listened to the show before, I've talked about it on a couple episodes. I've talked about it on my episode 0, I think, is how it's one of my favorite games of all time. And to keep a long story short, Advance Wars is the, in my opinion, less complicated, more approachable cousin of Fire Emblem. Both games having come over in around the same time span. Advance Wars was released in the United States in 2001. The first Fire Emblem game would be released a couple years later, finally bringing two longtime Intelligent Systems series over to the United States when they were only available in Japan for a very long time. In fact, Advance Wars 1 and 2 never even released outside of the United States and Europe. It was never available in Japan until the Advance Wars, it was actually called Game Boy Wars Advance 1 and 2 collection, over in Japan. So a little bit of interesting stuff that happened with the release dates of these games. And we're actually going to talk about the history of the first Advance Wars today. I've written a little bit of a piece that I'm going to read off, and I think it's going to be really exciting, really enlightening. And I titled this episode, How Advance Wars Changed Nintendo, because I think you can give Advance Wars some credit for shifting Nintendo's attitudes on some of their business practices. And we're going to get into that in a little bit here. But just to give you a little bit of an overview of the game, as I always do whenever I talk about a game on the show, Advance Wars is a turn-based strategy game created by Intelligent Systems and published by Nintendo for the Game Boy Advance. It was released in North America on September 10th, 2001. You probably can guess why that date's a little bit ominous. It wouldn't release in Japan until November 25th, 2004 as part of the collection that I just referenced. And Advance Wars probably holds the title for most unfortunate video game launch timing, seeing as it was a day before the 9/11 attacks. But to this day, it's got pretty stellar numbers across the board in terms of review scores. 92 out of 100 on Metacritic, 9.25 out of 10 on Game Informer, 9.9 out of 10 on IGN, 0.1 away from perfection. I'll have to go back and read that review and see what they docked a 0.1 for it. That's insane. Got 5 out of 5 stars for Nintendo Power, 10 out of 10 Eurogamer. It was rated at the time 26th best game on a Nintendo system by Nintendo Power. 26th best game on a Nintendo system. Inside the top 50 of all the games released on Nintendo systems up until that point when Advance Wars came out. 26 best. That's insane. That's insanely good. Edge Magazine, which is a magazine located out of United Kingdom, retroactively awarded the game a 10 out of 10 upon a re-review in 2013. It was one of only 23 games to achieve a 10 out of 10 in the magazine's 20-year history at a time. So they were only giving out a 10 out of 10, basically one a year. Not that many. And as I obviously stated here in my notes, but I obviously stated at the top of the episode, we are finally set to get the Advance Wars 1 and 2 Boot Camp on April 21st. It's days away. After that initial delay, you understand, because of the war in Ukraine. Now, I think at the time, this was probably the correct move to delay the game. Advance Wars 1 and 2 feature a nation that is sort of related to Russia / the Soviet Union. Olaf is even a commander in Advance Wars that specializes in snow warfare, snow combat, and his outfit is kind of based on the stereotypical Russian outfit, the hat and the coat and the boots and stuff like that. So I can understand why this move was made, but for it to be delayed so long, and I know I kind of talked to some people in my Discord about this, about how at the time I felt this was the right move. But of all the games depicting war and conflict, I would say Advance Wars is probably the most tame. It is presented in a very cartoonish way as to not be taken seriously. And a lot of people argued that I talked to that games like your Call of Duties and games that were much more realistic, much more violent like that, didn't delay their releases because of the war and didn't push back their dates for any of the stuff like that. Really, this being the only example of a game that got impacted because of the war in Ukraine. So interesting, albeit a little bit of a confusing move from Nintendo, but based on the reports and rumors we've gotten around this game, and I've kind of been following it closely for a while, it seems like the delay was actually a good thing, because I understand that if the rumors are to be believed, the development around this game was very, very tough, very challenging, and it was right down to the wire. So I'm hoping they use that extra year of time to polish the game and make it really good, especially when it comes to things like multiplayer and the competitive scene, because you might not think of a competitive scene when you think of Advanced Wars, but there is a very, very dedicated player base of competitive Advanced Wars players. You can go check out a website called Advanced Wars by Web, where they have global tournament structures and league rules and global map pools and rankings and people that are considered grandmasters at Advanced Wars. And there's a very, very active, robust, competitive scene. And they've created a pretty good thing on Advanced Wars by Web. So you're going to have to find a way to cater to that audience as well, if this is where you want them to play competitive Advanced Wars. Because the way Advanced Wars by Web is, it takes place in a browser, and you can play a turn, and then you can log off and leave, and your opponent can play their turn. And then when you come back on, you can play your turn. So it's very much like if you remember when Words with Friends came out, you would do a move, you'd put your word down, and then you leave it, and then when your friend played, they'd put their word down, and then it'd be your turn. So it was very much based on that concept. And that works well for Advanced Wars, because sometimes, especially the higher level players, like to think about their turns for a very, very long time, unless you're playing in a timed live format, which in that case, it's very much like speed chess. You have to think about your moves because you only have a limited amount of time to make your moves, and you get time added every turn. So I'm hoping that they use that to balance out some of the more broken COs, balance out more of the competitive side of things, make sure the local matchmaking, all that stuff is good, which I think that they probably would have. I've not heard any bad things about WayForward. I don't think I've played any of WayForward's games. I know they do the Shantae series, I think, but I digress. I know they've been I've seen them on my Twitter timeline a bunch lately, probably because I've been following about stuff they've been advertising, and I don't see any negative press or ill will around WayForward. So I'm definitely looking forward to the game, and we'll have to see what happens. But we're not here to talk about that. I just figured I would talk about it because it's prudent, because the game will be out in a couple of days. We're actually here to talk about kind of how we got to this point. How did we end up with a 1+2 reboot camp, a remake of a game that at the end of its life, Advance Wars Days of Ruin, was pretty much dead and on its last legs. In the way that Fire Emblem Awakening kind of revitalized the Fire Emblem franchise, Advance Wars Days of Ruin did not do that for the Advance Wars series. It pretty much all but killed it. And we haven't had a new game in over a decade. But now we got one, and I'm very, very excited. So you're probably thinking, well, Eric, the title of your episode here is How Advance Wars Changed Nintendo. So how did Advance Wars change Nintendo? And I'm sure it's not the only factor, but I think it's probably a big one. And I think people need to consider that when considering this game for its legacy and its importance overall. And it's the reason why I've been spreading the good news of Advance Wars, as I've called it, on Twitter, because I think this game is very, very important. And it's also very addictive and fun. It's something you can pick up and put down for a couple minutes at a time. So why don't we dive in to the little story that I prepared and learn just exactly how Advance Wars changed Nintendo. When it comes to most video game releases, we're pretty lucky nowadays. Whenever a video game comes out, it is pretty common for it to be available worldwide for everyone to play simultaneously, thanks to the rise of globalization and the internet. With most games going digital, it is a simple matter to preload or download the game the day of release and be experiencing the game with everyone else. But rewind 20 plus years ago, this wasn't always the case, with some games releasing in different regions at different times and some games not even leaving their home regions like Japan. In fact, many games in the early days of Nintendo didn't make the journey west due to preconceived notions by Nintendo about Western gamers. One example of this is the famous Super Mario Bros. 2, better known in the West as the Lost Levels. While those of us outside Japan got a reskinned version of Doki Doki Panic as our Super Mario Bros. 2, Japan saw a release of an actual successor to the smash hit Super Mario Bros. The reason for this was a long-standing stigma that Nintendo had against Western gamers. The sequel to Mario was for those who had truly mastered it, and it would simply be too hard for players outside of Japan. While there are a variety of factors as to why games wouldn't ship to North America, this line of thinking was long a consideration of Nintendo and other Japanese companies when choosing which games to ship to the West. Another example of this is Capcom including normal and hard mode on Mega Man 2 for Western audiences, while in Japan you simply played the game on hard as the one and only difficulty. And also famously, earlier Final Fantasy games didn't even find their way west, resulting in a very confusing numbering convention when Final Fantasy VII released for the PS1. But as video games became more popular worldwide, these thoughts would start to waver at Nintendo. And there's one surprising game that had a lot to do with shifting Nintendo's attitudes toward Western audiences. And that game is, of course, Advance Wars. While its best known entry is probably the surprise 2001 hit on the Game Boy Advance, the Wars series actually dates back to 1988 with the first game Famicom Wars, which was developed by Intelligent Systems and Nintendo R&D 1 for the Famicom, which was of course the Japanese version of the NES. This would launch a brand new but Japan-only series for Nintendo, and would see 4 additional games released across the Famicom, Super Famicom, and Game Boy by Nintendo, which included Game Boy Wars, Game Boy Wars Turbo, Super Famicom Wars, Game Boy Wars 2, and Game Boy Wars 3. Intelligent Systems would have a hand in the main console releases as well as Game Boy Wars 1, and our friends over at Hudson Soft would be responsible for the remainder of the titles on the Game Boy. During this time, Intelligent Systems would have a hand in making another series that is well known around the world today, but at the time was also only available in Japan. And this, of course, was Fire Emblem. With the pending release of Game Boy Wars 3 in 2001, this is where the timeline of Advance Wars starts to come into focus. And a series of interesting events would finally bring the tactical strategy series to North America. Rumors of a new and more powerful Nintendo handheld system had been swirling for a while around the late 90s. The original Game Boy hardware had been on the market since 1989, and while a refresh in the Game Boy Color came out in 1998, the technology existed to create an even more powerful handheld system. And it turns out, the rumors were true. At Nintendo Space World in August 1999, rumors were finally confirmed that Nintendo was indeed working on a brand new handheld, and the Game Boy Advance was revealed to the world 1 month later. To hit a March 2001 release in Japan and June 2001 release in North America, Nintendo partnered with a lot of developers to have a strong lineup of games for the launch of the Game Boy Advance, which would ultimately include such games like Super Mario Advance, F-Zero Maximum Velocity, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater from Activision, and Rayman from Ubisoft. Nintendo also wanted the Wars series game to be included in the launch lineup despite Game Boy Wars 3 being slated to release in 2001 as well. But with Nintendo already working on 2 GBA games, that would be a tall order. So once again, they turned to the reliable Intelligent Systems to create a next handheld gen entry in the Wars series. Advance Wars would be confirmed early in 2001 when Nintendo France gave exclusive screenshots of the game to French gaming sites. Makoto Shimojo was tasked with directing, while designer Kentaro Nishimura would supervise the project. During the early stages of development, the Advance Wars team just started throwing any and every unique idea they could come up with at Nintendo, most of which were shot down as it was not suited for a general audience, which is what Nintendo was aiming for. Tactics games already had a reputation for a more hardcore audience, and Nintendo wanted to break that stigma, so the team went back to the drawing board. First, they determined that they should design the game with the Game Boy Advance's core audience in mind, which were children that tended to skew younger. This laid the groundwork for the game's bright and vibrant colors and cartoony art style. But that wouldn't stop the developers from starting to incorporate some of their favorite elements from games that they'd like to play. For example, one developer was a huge fan of shooters and how precisely they controlled. So the movement and the cursor selection was made incredibly snappy and precise in order to allow players to control their units down to the pixel. Another developer was a fan of rhythm games and designed the units to bob up and down to the beat of the music, lending the game a unique and incredible sense of rhythm that was uncommon in this style of game. In terms of unit design, Intelligent Systems decided to be a bit more serious about this in order to cater to players who were fans of historical weapons and warfare. All the units take inspiration from real-life military vehicles and soldiers. For example, the infantry for the Orange Star Nation resembled World War II/Vietnam-era American infantry, with their guns resembling the M1918 bar and wearing the M1 helmet. Tanks for the Blue Moon Nation were based on Soviet T-34-85 tanks. Intelligent Systems put a big emphasis on making sure maps were balanced, with the team replaying maps multiple times to make sure they were fair for novice players, but challenging enough for skilled players. Shimojo noted that this became a challenge as he got better at the game, for how could a skilled player determine what was a fair difficulty for a novice player? To solve this, he implemented a two-way review system to ensure maps were balanced as fairly as possible. When maps were submitted to him, he would play them several times and send notes back to the developers about changes and balances that needed to be made. After the changes were made, the maps would then be made available to Nintendo's debugging team, who would further test the maps and provide an additional source of feedback, allowing the developers to fine-tune the maps even more, once with notes from more skilled players, such as Shimojo, and once with feedback from more novice players on the debug team. Shimojo spent as much time as possible on balancing the game to make sure it was perfect, so much so that the deadline to launch the game was rapidly approaching, and Nintendo had to tell the team to stop testing. It was time to ship the game. It's worth noting that Shimojo credits this balancing process as the reason why the game is so beloved to this day. Like the Wars games that had come before it, Advance Wars was originally intended to be a Japanese exclusive release. As mentioned earlier, Nintendo just didn't think the West would be into this kind of strategy game. But When the marketing team at Nintendo of America got their hands on the game, they absolutely loved it. They appealed to Nintendo to let them sell it in the US, and Nintendo reluctantly agreed. In order to combat the disinterest in turn-based strategy games that Nintendo was convinced existed in North America, an extensive tutorial was added to the game, detailing and explaining all of the rules and mechanics while allowing you to play specifically curated scenarios in order to teach the player everything they needed to know to be successful. With everything in place, it was decided Advance Wars would be released in North America first, on September 10th, 2001, with a Japanese release coming a bit later. It was time to see if Nintendo's gamble on the Western audience would pay off. Well, to any astute observer, the release date should raise immediate eyebrows, for Advance Wars was in fact released the day before the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center towers in New York. This day sent shockwaves around the world, causing such an impact that Nintendo actually delayed and then canceled the Japanese release of Advance Wars and delayed the European launch, meaning it was now a rare example of a North American European exclusive that wouldn't launch in Japan. In fact, Japan wouldn't see the release of Advance Wars or Advance Wars 2 until 2004, when it was released as a combo pack called Game Boy Wars Advance 1 and 2. Despite the unfortunate timing, the critical reception of Advance Wars was incredible. It debuted with a 92 on Metacritic, which means near universal acclaim, and received 9s and 10s from major game reviewers including IGN, Game Informer, Nintendo Power, and more. Critics praised the engaging and addictive tactical combat, as well as the artistic and gameplay design that made it stand out among other titles on the GBA. The game retroactively received a 10 from UK-based Edge magazine in 2013, one of only 23 games to get a perfect score in the near 20-year history of the magazine. In 2009, official Nintendo magazine called it an almost faultless blend of fiendish strategy and Nintendo magic. It was also ranked the 26th best game on a Nintendo system by Nintendo Power in Nintendo Power's Top 200 Games list. More than critical acclaim and accolades, Advance Wars' success helped to break down barriers and long-held stigmas at Nintendo. This little strategy game that Westerners weren't supposed to like or comprehend had done the impossible and had developed a devoted fan base. Julian Gollop, creator of the XCOM series, credits the popularity of Advance Wars with opening up opportunities for games like his to have a chance to be successful. And supervisor Kentaro Nishimura has stated in interviews that if it wasn't for the success of Advance Wars, Nintendo wouldn't have decided to finally bring Fire Emblem to North America, which just so happens to be another game that Nishimura was extensively involved with. The performance of Advance Wars guaranteed a sequel, which would release in 2003 titled Advance Wars 2 Black Hole Rising. And in November of 2003, Fire Emblem would finally arrive on the shores of the US. Fire Emblem, as it was titled on the GBA, known in the fandom as Fire Emblem 7 or Fire Emblem The Blazing Blade, also met with critical success for Intelligent Systems. A sequel, titled Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones, would follow a year later in 2004. While I don't doubt that Nintendo would have eventually reached the point where they were sending a majority of their games overseas, there's no denying that a little game called Advance Wars helped move the timeline along. Nintendo never wanted to send this game to North America, and it was only by the urging of the team at Nintendo of America that genuine curiosity prevailed. Could this small strategy game that had only ever been released in Japan succeed in a Western market? The answer was a resounding yes. While not as successful as its cousin Fire Emblem, which would go on to be a critically important series for Nintendo, Advance Wars helped pave the way for the first Fire Emblem ever to come to America. With the imminent release of the long-awaited Advance Wars 1+2 Reboot Camp, the stage is set for a brand new generation to experience these games for the first time. guys enjoyed just that brief little short thing that I wrote. I really enjoyed doing the research and writing that little piece. It's part of my initiative to do more scripted things for the show. Like I said, this episode's probably going to be a little bit shorter, but Advance Wars really was the little strategy game that could, and Nintendo of America really, really liked this game, and they wanted to see if it could be successful over here, and it was. And I don't think, if you looked at it, the number of units that were sold and what it did commercially compared to some other games, you probably wouldn't think much of it. But like the creator of XCOM said, the Advance Wars series paved the way for games like his, and for games that offered a more unique blend of strategy. If we didn't have Advance Wars, XCOM might never have happened. Mario plus Rabbids might never have happened. Some of this other indie stuff might never have happened. Your game like Wargroove would never have happened. And what may have been the biggest travesty of all, Fire Emblem may never have finally come to the West. And it might have just been two weird Japanese swords guys in Smash Bros. And that would all have been our entire experience. I'm sure Fire Emblem would have eventually come west. I think that Advance Wars definitely helped speed up the process, though. And this was a critically important decision because Fire Emblem has been probably in the last decade or so one of the more important franchises that Nintendo has leaned on. I mean, just look at the success of Three Houses, and the Fire Emblem fan base is one of the most passionate fan bases that I've ever interacted with. And it's all thanks to a little strategy game called Advance Wars. And it's coming out again in 2 days. Now, I don't know what to expect. I don't know if my nostalgia will be an inhibitor for me to be able to judge this game fairly. The art style looks really cool, and I'm very excited about that all the music is redone, that there's acted voice lines and all. I think that'll be very, very interesting compared to like the canon voice lines that I've had in my head for so long. So I think that'll be a very interesting thing to see when this game comes out. And if this game is successful, maybe we'll be able to get more Advance Wars games in the future, which if they can redeem it and do a good job, I think that would be incredible. It would be really cool to see some kind of Dual Strike DLC to be included with this game where you can get the Dual Strike COs. I think that would be super cool if they implement that, but we'll have to see. And I will be waiting with bated breath. Some of the reviews for this game might have already started coming out. We'll have to see. But it certainly does have a very large legacy to fill up with, even if it's not a very well-known legacy. It's one of the better rated games on Metacritic, according to the scores that I've seen. And it's just pretty incredible to think about. It's even crazier to think about that we got a new Fire Emblem game this year, and we're getting a new Advance Wars game this year. I'd pretty much given up any hope that anything would be done with the Advance Wars series. I figured it was just dead and gone. Maybe it would be revitalized and dug up by a spiritual successor of an indie developer or something like that. But it's fully coming back, and maybe I'm just trying to stretch this episode out because I've said ultimately what I wanted to say, in that I think Advance Wars did change Nintendo and change a lot of minds and really shifted Nintendo's viewpoints, especially when you see it in the context of the commercial failure of the GameCube, that combined with the success of Advance Wars and the stuff that was happening there really caused them to shift their outlook for the next 10 or so years, and may have ultimately led to the success that was the Nintendo Wii. So a lot of interesting factors in there, and there's a lot of interesting business stuff that you can dive into if you're interested about video game business. During this era of Nintendo, they have some really interesting stuff that happened. And it's for that reason that I love Intelligent Systems, I love Advance Wars, I love Fire Emblem. Those games have had a very, very special place in my heart for a long time. And I hope that my little history lesson has led you to appreciate them a little bit more. These games are not hard to get, especially now that the Reboot Camp is coming out. You might scoff at the $60 price tag for 2 GBA games is essentially what it is, but believe me, it's worth it. You'll get your money out of it, I promise. There's plenty of challenges to be had, and there's plenty of strategy to be done in all of the maps and stuff. And who knows what new surprises they have in store for us. If you're hesitant about it because of the way I've described it as a game like Fire Emblem, I believe they're implementing a feature that you can rewind turns or rewind your turn if you made a mistake. So I think they're implementing more tools that are going to make it more player friendly, because that's what they've done in Fire Emblem to make it a little more accessible. So I think that they're following suit with this as well. I remember reading that or seeing that they had a time kind of rewind thing. So enough being said about that. I'm very excited. I'll have my full report on the game soon as I've had time to dive into it. I'll probably consume it until Zelda comes out. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome, and I'm very excited to share it all with you. Thank you guys so much for listening. Like I said, this was going to be a little bit shorter of an episode. The secret's out now, and I've been putting this off because I had a bunch of pre-recorded episodes in March that I didn't have stuff ready for. And this might even be out of the timeline because I'm sure this episode will come after an episode I haven't recorded yet and things get shuffled around. But the Patreon is now live. That's right, I did the thing that I said I was absolutely never going to do, and I sold out and started a Patreon. So if you'd like to support the show a little more, for as little as $3 a month, you can have access to the Rare Unlocked tier, or for $5 a month, you can be subscribed to the Super Rare Unlocked tier. In the Rare Unlocked tier, you get access to a number of fantastic goodies right away. You get access to what I'm titling pre-episode monologues, where I'll do short little 10-minute speeches before my episodes to warm up. I'll upload those here. You get game reviews for all the games that I play in 2023. You get a patron shout out, which happened at the top of this episode. On all podcast episodes, you get access to an exclusive Discord channel in the Unlockables Discord, as well as an exclusive Discord title. And you get access to gaming polls, which should be going up soon to decide what I play next and what you want to hear me talk about. And then if you want to subscribe at the higher tier and support a little bit more, for $5 a month, you can have access to the Super Rare Unlocked tier, which is currently the highest tier of support that you can give. And what's included in that is everything in the Rare Unlocked tier, in addition to 2 exclusive full-length episodes / series that I'm doing. The first one, I'm just going to be putting out exclusive full-length episodes, such as top 10s, tier lists, randomness, anything that I think would be a good patron exclusive thing. I will put out a full episode on that and upload it to this tier. And what I'm actually most excited for, and should have a couple episodes up by the time this comes out, I am doing my Gotta Watch 'Em All Pokemon series rewatch. That is right. Me and my wife are rewatching all 1,000 plus episodes of Ash's Journey on the Pokemon anime, 3 episodes at a time. And I'm releasing an episode to talk about each batch of 3 that we watch. It's going to be a really fun time. My wife is not going to record the episode with me, but I'll put some of her takes and inputs, if she has any, into the episodes. That's going to be a massive undertaking. So if you feel like you want to support the show a little bit more, you can subscribe at either one of those tiers. You just have to go to patreon.com/unlockables. And if you decide to, that really would mean a lot to me. I never expected to be able to get anything like this from doing this podcast, or the fact that people would actually want to support with a little bit of money. That's truly shocking. And all of your support goes right back into the show and helps me pay for things like Adobe, pay for things like computer upgrades, new microphones, things that I want to get. It will all be used to make the show better. And by make the show better, I mean I'm going to put it in my Panama bank account offshore to gather a bunch of money. And then one day I'm just going to disappear and you'll never see me again. No, just kidding. But if you decide to, thank you so much. I would really, really appreciate it. As far as the rest of the socials, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff, you can go to linktr.ee/unlockables podcast and find all the buttons there for Spotify, Amazon Music, where you can listen to the podcast, all the social media stuff. Oh, join the Discord too. We've got a really, really awesome group of podcasters, of video game fans on Discord, talking about a bunch of stuff. I haven't been as active lately because it's been really busy at work, and trying to balance work and life has been a little bit stressful. But thankfully, I got a little bit ahead. So the people in the Discord are keeping that going for me and having some fantastic conversations, and some some pretty diabolical ones too. But go and join that. It's a great time, and you'll meet some fantastic new people. You'll find some great new podcasts, and just find a welcoming environment to talk about the games that you love. That is going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much again for listening. Really means the world to me. I'll see you on the battlefield for Advance Wars. And remember, it's not just the story of video games. It's the story of you.